Hey guys, this is kind of our little mini series about the talk that we delivered at the Royal Northern and Clyde Yacht Club in the UK, which was really good fun to do. Proper like highbrow type vibes about the place, but everyone there was really chill, really relaxed, and we had such a great time doing it.
If you have missed part one, you can go back and see that. That's all about how we bought our boat, how we got started sailing in the Caribbean. And today, this video is part two, which tells more of the story of how we crossed the Pacific and, spoiler alert, everything that went wrong.
Such a wild ride, yeah. Sit back, hold on, and it's a bit longer than normal, but hopefully you can fill your beverage. And if you've got an extra bottle to keep filling, you'll have a really good time. We actually did a bit of zigzagging up and down through the Caribbean a little bit more after that. We had family come out to visit for the first time, which was great. And then we said, right, okay, this is it. We've done the Caribbean to death. We've seen pretty much all of the islands, one or two missed out, but not that much. And we want to do something a bit bigger. So we decided it was time to leave the Caribbean and we'll just cross, I don't know, something like 4,000, 5,000 miles. To the center of the Pacific. Literally, we were going to aim for the center of the Pacific, a group of islands called the Marquesas in French Polynesia. And this island in particular was the first one we landed on.
We had met a bunch of people in Trinidad who had done this journey before, and before we moved onto a boat, crossing an ocean was absolutely never on the cards, certainly not in the picture that I had of what we were going off to do. But somehow they kind of sold this paradise to us. So off we went and found ourselves searching for something that little bit further away.
That's it. So the planning began, and if anyone's done these passages, you know, it sounds gloriously easy, but it takes a little while. So we started planning out what we would need in terms of our route. For fun, I hasten to say, we did it on charts, on paper charts, as well as electronically. Probably for the best, because my chart work isn't that good. But yeah, we took our sightings, and every day we were kind of keeping track in case everything went catastrophically wrong. We also got provisions together. On the right there, we don't normally point in pictures, but on the right there you can see two giant blue barrels. That was for extra diesel, because we figured, you know, the doldrums, right across the middle of the equator, we might be struggling a little bit there. So we took a ton of extra fuel with us.
And then we also took, obviously, a whole ton of provisions. So we were expecting the crossing to take about 28 days. We have actually got into the habit now of doing one food shop every 6 months. So we go to a cheap country like Trinidad or Panama. We rent a car for a day. We go to 6 different supermarkets, fill it up as many times as we can, fill the boat with food. And then it means that we can go to either the countries that are more expensive or countries that just don't have any resources. We can be as off-grid as we need to be. So provisioning for the crossing was actually not too different from what we do anyway.
Yeah, we got the absolute necessities. We got Coca-Cola, crisps, and Pop-Tarts.
That's all you need.
And I'll tell you, when you're doing a long 8-hour watch at night, a Pop-Tart is a real treat. Yeah, we got through most of those before we landed. The crisps, I think, lasted a little bit longer, but yeah, we only got the imperative things. We're very millennial. We had some fruit, I think.
It didn't last very long.
No. So we worked out our route. This is kind of a vague idea of where we actually passaged. So we were going to go and leave Panama. We'd already gone through the canal. We actually made a really fun video on that if you ever want to see how the canal looks. And then we worked our way south, kind of between Galapagos, which is here in the middle here, and the Ecuadorian coast. The idea was we would bounce our way south until we picked up the trade winds, which everyone talks so wistfully of. The trade winds, in theory, you get down there, you turn right, and then you can just open your sails up and you will sleep till you arrive. It's super simple. And we'd been sold this dream, as Bernie said, that we would just head south, pick up the trade winds, and away we would go.
You can see all those wiggles in our lovely straight line that wasn't straight anymore, because this year was actually an El Nino year, which I think was the first year in 7 years, which means that the conditions are that much bigger than expected. And every boat that crossed had real issues with crazy weather. The trade winds at one point reversed, so we were sailing into wind, which was not what we signed up for at all.
Absolutely. But we did get visitors. We had some pilot whales, we had spinner dolphins. That was the worst. There was a couple of boats this year on the crossing that actually they had whale strikes, let's just call it that. And there's been some excitement around that. But we got fortunate. The whales were very friendly. We made sure to go over and say hi. We have a habit of that. And they were just hanging out, to be honest.
Yeah, it was just before sunset as we passed Galapagos, and these guys just came and stayed on the surface for about half an hour right next to our boat. So we sort of just stopped where we were going and just drifted along with them. It was absolutely incredible.
And then we made it to the equator. Now, there's an obligation when you cross the equator to do some ridiculous ceremony, which Brenny took very seriously. I slightly less, so I was more thinking, when are we going to get there? At this point, we weren't sailing very much. You can probably see this, the Genoa is kind of flapping around a bit. We crossed extremely slowly, as in we were motoring, and then we insisted we were going to sail across the equator. So we put our sail out with basically no wind and drifted to the point that you could walk from the bow to the stern and back again and just keep crossing the equator. It was great. And then once we did make it over, we did what we like to do sometimes, a halyard swing. So we have a spinnaker halyard, and we'd swing it off the side of the boat, splash in the water, and then go, it's like 5 kilometers down, and there's things down there. So we didn't stay in the water too long, but hopefully the splashes scare things away, although I think the sharks, it's the opposite. I'm told that.
Yes, thankfully no sharks either way, but we made it.
We went a little bit crazy, yes. And then shortly after the equator and all that celebration, I mentioned there wasn't much wind. That's because we did reach the doldrums. If you're not aware of those, basically it's an area where there's basically no wind. So we are about 1,000 miles from anywhere at this point. Closest land is about 1,000 miles away. And the sea is like mill pond flat. So we ended up motoring for,
I think 6 days we were motoring through it, just no possibility to have the sails out at all.
but it's very surreal. I get to sneak this one in that Bryony may have done a little bit of a hit and run on a turtle, which she had plenty of notice of, and we didn't put in a video, but I get to tell you guys.
It was fine. It was fine. And I still maintain it was the turtle's fault.
Yes, enough said on that. So you'd think, okay, we're kind of under control now. Everything's going to be fine. We're going to make it to the winds. Well, that's roughly when the problem started. And there was quite a few of those commitment testers. Again, we won't go into all of them. You can watch videos on them if you really want. But quite a few things went wrong just after the doldrums. Actually, during the doldrums, our engine.
Yes, well, we will come to that a little bit later on. I think it was week 3 of our passage, which should have been sort of the second half. But as you may have guessed from that slide, the journey took a little bit longer than the 28 days that we forecast. But we basically had a week solid of squalls, of cloud cover, almost constant rain, and plenty of lightning to go with it. So as we said, we are 100% reliable on solar. And when the skies look like that for 7 days, we were getting very, very concerned for our power consumption.
Yeah, we were just watching the batteries falling towards zero. And then we had a week solid of lightning storms, day and night. So heavy was the rain that our tender, our dinghy, which we always pull the bung out the back so it can drain, it filled to the top with the bung out. It was firing water across the back of the boat. And yeah, we basically sat there having a bit of a nervous breakdown. I'm assuming everyone here has a knowledge of sailing, but lightning is a bad thing. And we were worried. If we got hit by lightning, we lose all instruments. We'd probably lose pretty much everything on board, including laptops and EPIRBs and safety equipment. So there was some very white knuckles on the helm seat for a couple of days. But we did push through.
We did. Lightning is one of those things where there's just not really that much you can do to prevent it or avoid it. So we saw these squalls coming in, and we just had to keep sailing and cross our fingers. There was nothing we could do. We couldn't divert and go a different route because we just wouldn't get there fast enough. So yeah, it was just a very scary week of
43 knots of wind and hammering down rain. And you'll notice that we reefed so much that we're literally going less than 4 knots, which is pretty slow in 40 knots of wind. So we were seeing every single wave multiple times.
Yeah.
And we mentioned things kind of kept spiraling a bit. That's when things went really annoying. I'm going to say annoying. Our engine, we are a catamaran, we have 2, but one decided it had enough. Really, really had enough. It basically melted. So we are currently without an engine on our port side. I was having a very bad day, as you might be able to tell. That is oil, just in case you think it's something else. But yes, it was a bit of a bad feeling in the middle of an ocean.
And I know a lot of people think, well, that's fine, you're sailing across an ocean, you don't need an engine. We were down to 1, as we say, a catamaran. We did have redundancy. That one developed an oil leak, so we later had to say, well, we won't use that one either, because we need it when we get to the other end, and we're going to anchor in a tight, rolly bay with lots of other boats around, and we really couldn't lose that one as well. So during the lightning, we couldn't engine to get out of it. We had 3 days in the doldrums where there was no wind, and we just had to drift and wait for the wind to come back 3 days later.
It was nice. I had a few more swims that week.
Yes.
Actually, freshwater showers, come to think of it. But thankfully, eventually we got out of the doldrums. So we were heading south past about 4 or 5 degrees south if you're into your sailing paths. or passaging. And at that point, we did manage to get the sails up, and things started to look a lot better.
By this stage, I'm sort of losing track of time here, but we must have been about halfway through. It had been 2 or 3 weeks since we had seen any other boat at all on the horizon.
And then this guy showed up. No AIS, at first not responding to radio. We might have been out of range. But we did eventually hail them. We said, vessel blah, blah, are you fishing? And a very excited Spanish voice came back very quickly. And we'd only just been learning Spanish back in Panama, so we didn't really understand a word he said. So we said, are you fishing? And they said, blah, blah, blah. And then a guy jumped in a speedboat and came towards us very, very fast. And we thought, wait, this could be piracy. We don't have a clue. They're not talking to us. We don't know what to do. He actually comes up in a moment and bashes off the side of our boat quite abruptly. And he reaches under the canopy here, and we panic a little bit. And actually, it's just after he hits us. We think, what are you about to do? What are you bringing out? And he says, yeah, fish. Oh, no, we said, are you fishing? Not do you have fish? So awkwardly, we kind of shoo them away, going, no, go, get back to your boat. It's only, half a nautical mile away in open ocean in the Pacific.
I know that's blurry, but you can see how confused they are. But we just got in our dinghy for you. We just came to rescue you with food. And now you're telling us to go away again with scared looks on your faces.
And they got very wet doing that too. We felt pretty guilty. The problem was that we had been fishing quite a lot. So our freezer was full. So we'd caught tuna. We'd caught, these guys are mahi-mahi. You might have seen pictures of them. The other name is Dorado, I think. They're beautiful green, yellow fish. They're absolutely stunning. They actually swim in pairs, so it's kind of the humane thing to catch both because they're partners. You don't leave one alone in the sea. This tuna, by the way, we went through a little school of them, a big school of them, and Brownie banned me from fishing because they were jumping all around the boat for 3 or 4 days.
Our freezer was so full, we could not fit any more fish on the boat. Our fridge was overflowing. We couldn't eat any more fish, so we had to pull the lines in. And as soon as we did, all of these tuna just started jumping around, laughing at us because they knew that we couldn't catch them.
Yeah, tuna are evil. But nonetheless, we had plenty of food going, and our batteries were recovering by now, so the freezer was good again, which is a relief. And as I say, things were going pretty well. We had the spinnaker up, big, large cruising chute, and that keeps our speed up, and you can downwind sail very easily. It was all looking very peachy for a while.
Finally, we kind of thought that the Pacific crossing that we've been promised, that everyone has described, where you just set your sails and lie back and enjoy the ocean, we've made it. This is it for the whole rest of the crossing now. We've had the hard luck. Our engine's broken. We've had pirates. We've almost lost power. We've had lightning. That's it. We've got through the worst, and now it's going to be blissful.
Absolutely. So I mentioned earlier we were doing 8-hour shifts. So kind of a full working day, and then you get to sleep for 16 hours. It's very nice. Or usually didn't sleep all of that, but most of it actually. And it was all looking pretty peachy until that happened. Our spinnaker exploded pretty spectacularly. It was in a squall in a big storm. Actually, I blame the other boat. One other vessel turned up and kind of cut past us very, very close for an open ocean. It didn't make any sense. And I saw the squall coming in. We both went forward. We had our hand on what's called the sock. We're going to douse the spinnaker. It pulls a sleeve over it, if you like. Hand was on the line to pull it down, and just as we went to do it, you heard a zipping sound. And 8.5 meters, I think, of sail just ripped open and fell into the sea. In the dark, of course. It only ever happens at 2 in the morning. Everything goes wrong on a boat. It happens at 2 a.m. I'm convinced.
Yeah, so that was a really big problem. I think we were about 4 seconds away from socking that spinnaker and therefore not losing it. Luckily, we managed to get the whole sail back on board with no further damage. But that was pretty terminal. So at this point, we had to recognize that was our main downwind sailing plan. And we're in the trade. So that was what we'd been relying on to get us all the way to French Polynesia.
150 to 200 nautical mile days dropped to like 70. So we were adding days to our ETA. Quite significant days, like weeks. We added a lot of time to our ETA at this point. We did have a backup plan. The bowsprit we mentioned allows us to fly this contraption. This is actually, we call it the Nessie, actually. We name all our sails. So the spinnaker was Kraken. The Kraken died. We released Nessie. This is actually a Genoa from a much larger catamaran. It was donated to us because the owner didn't want it. And we repurposed it onto our bowsprit. And it was all going well again until this unfortunate incident. Which we didn't know how to fly a Jenniker. So it snapped the bowsprit off 4 times. We repaired it each time after dragging it back on board, as you can see. We repaired the bowsprit. That's quite an exciting thing to do as well. You lean off the bow of the boat with the ocean rushing underneath you, with a rivet gun in one hand, the bowsprit in another, and some loose rivets, and you just hope you're not going to fall in. But as I say, we did that multiple times until we ran out of rivets. So we said, right, we don't have a downwind plan. We're just going to use our Genoa from now on. And we thought, fine, we have autopilots on Genoa. Life can be easy until our autopilot broke.
So we had like maybe 3 or 4 days of like the autopilot would work a little bit and then it would get tired and we were back to hand steering. So having done 8-hour shifts and being quite in that routine of things, we couldn't concentrate for 8 hours hand steering. So the shifts got shorter, we got grumpier. Everything was not quite as peachy as it had been.
We also learned how to steer with our feet, which is what Brenny's doing right now, which is quite a fun task to do. But eventually I lost my patience. I'd been on shift for 8 hours. Brenny woke up to take over. She took the helm. I went inside and did some percussive maintenance with a hammer, and the autopilot started to cooperate. It turns out if you hit it hard enough times, it will cooperate. And weirdly enough, it worked for the rest of the passage. So whatever words I may have uttered at it, it worked.
So there we are. Our spinnaker has blown out. We've now lost our bowsprit as well. We're down an engine. The other one has got an oil leak, so we can't use that. Autopilot being a little bit flaky, we thought, well, at least it can't get any worse. And then, of course, we thought, why did we say that? This has definitely been the hardest night of this entire crossing.
We were pretty close to calling a pan last night.
There was a massive bang.
Our helm had completely died.
And as soon as I took the wheel, I knew that our steering cable had snapped. It was kind of action stations. It was kind of blind panic.
We had 40 knots of wind. We had waves crashing all the way into the cockpit.
That is the most scared I have ever been on our boat.
An abrupt end. Yes, our steering cable looked like that.
And even if you've never seen a steering cable before, I think you can imagine it's not supposed to look like that.
Yeah, quite literally we have 2 lines that come from our helm. And basically you turn one way and it pulls one of those cables, and you turn it the other way, it pulls the other one. So when the steering cable snapped, the helm just went completely loose and we had no way to control the vessel in what direction it was going. So we had what turned out to be a very long night. It was midnight when this happened. This is a terrible picture. We weren't really in the zone at the time. This is me using the emergency tiller on the back of our boat, which directly connects to the rudder. It's a catamaran, so it's actually connected to one rudder, a massive long piece of metal, and the other rudder. So it's a lot of hard work to stay on course. And a slight design flaw in our boat, that's actually on backwards. So you have to steer in a kind of reverse order whilst the waves are crashing waist deep all around you in the dark with a setting moon, actually, while it was going on.
Yeah, we only had the moon for about 2 hours before it was going to disappear. And we got ourselves into this situation and said, well, at least now we can keep the boat at least vaguely going forwards. We didn't care which direction we were going. We just tried to stay with the waves behind us. Thankfully, we had just dropped our main sail only a couple of hours beforehand. We reefed up the Genoa, so it was just a tiny little triangle just to try and keep us pointing the way that we wanted to go. And we knew that we couldn't do that. We still had almost 1,000 miles to go until we reached land. And we knew that that was not a long-term plan. So the first job was just to try and get both of us back into the cockpit so that we could control things from there, which was not very easy.
No, we rigged up a few different solutions. We tried running lines back into the cockpit on winches, but the conditions being what they were, the boat just kept wanting to turn into wind, or turn into waves, actually. So it wasn't going very well. So eventually we had a bit of a confab on this back step, actually. Bernie stood down there, and we were like, okay, we're going to have to put our steering system back together. Somehow we have to make this work. And we were thinking, okay, what do we have? Nessie, the Jenniker sail. That has a piece of Dyneema that's super long. Maybe we could get that and we could replace that steel cable. So I did what every person should do. I sent my wife up to the bow of a boat in the middle of a massive storm and told her to figure out how to take a rope out.
So at this point we had 40 knots of wind. It was still pitch black. And I forgot until I got there that the bolt rope was obviously in the center of the furled sail. And that sail is massive. But we didn't want to unfurl it on deck because there was so much wind that was definitely going to cause problems. So I was up there for about 20 minutes trying to unwind the top of the sail and inch out a little bit more line at a time. And I got 7 meters out in the end, and I just had to hope that that was enough. And so cut the line and really hoped I hadn't made a mistake and took that back.
Yeah,
to
back
then
to
look
the
at
scoop.
how we would actually attach it.
So, again, being responsible, I did what every guy would do with their partner on board. I opened the engine bay door, threw Brownie in there and shut it. And she was locked in there for a while, actually. It's a bit tight. She had to run new steering cables for us, basically. So, yeah, you ran it from our starboard rudder, round a sheave, and then up into a cabin and all the way out to the helm.
Yeah, as you could see, Ian had the emergency tiller connected straight to the rudder. That is the doorway into our engine bay. So we had to disconnect the steering, wait for the big waves to go, time it right to open that, and then I had to jump in and have the lid shut again so that we didn't flood our one leaky sort of working engine. So yes, I was locked in there trying to tie everything together. I've only been in the engine bay once before while underway, and I almost had a panic attack, didn't complete what I was in there to do, and came out crying. So we sort of took 5 minutes before this stage of going, right, is there any other way that we can achieve this? And we thought, no, that we have to do it. And then we thought, should we? Is this the point where we should be stopping and giving up and abandoning ship and saying it's all over? Because we don't want to be those people who didn't make that call.
Yeah, and remember, this boat was designed for charter. It's originally made for holidays, right? It's not meant to be out in the middle of the Pacific. It's done ocean crossings, but certain design features like that are one of the reasons we have to kind of work around our budget requirements on the design. And it led to, I think, 3 hours to repair the steering system, and then another 3 hours of monitoring it. So at 6 a.m. by the time we both got a bit of rest, we were absolutely broken by then. You ended up on shift for something crazy.
I think I did an 18-hour shift that night. By the time you went to bed, you were wrecked, but I was just so hyped up on adrenaline. I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to sleep anyway, so I need to try and calm down. And for about 2 days after that, I just sat staring at these huge waves rolling behind us that were coming up over the hardtop. And then just before they broke, the boat would just rise up over them. But every single time I thought, this one's it. This one's going to crash over us. This one's going to do it.
We started nicknaming them mountains. So like, oh, here comes another mountain. And they were steep. The whole boat would go up and right up to the top of this wave and then plummet back down the other side. It was quite uncomfortable.
But by the morning, we not only had our steering back, we also had autopilot back. So for the next 8 days, we didn't need to be hand steering. We could just take that little bit more time to sort of process everything. It meant that twice a day we could jump down into the engine bay and check that nothing was chafing, check that all was okay. And it held up. It held up the whole 1,000 miles until we reached land. And actually, we haven't been able to repair it since. So it's still working 3 months later.
So as I said, we're aiming for literally the middle of the Pacific, 4,200 miles. This is a tiny island called Hila'oa, part of the Marquesas. The Marquesas is a group of islands in French Polynesia. And we were aiming for this tiny little port. When you zoom in on Google Earth or on any map, it is literally, you can just see South America and you can just see New Zealand. That's kind of where we're talking about. So all in all, it took us...
It took 39 and a half days. So
and a half. 39 and a half days.
We are claiming that half. We earned it.
Absolutely. And we crawled in and we had a bit of a welcome party, which was absolutely delightful. We had these beautiful whales turn up. I forget the name of what type of whale this is, annoyingly. But yeah, a whole pod of them arrived and showed us our way to the anchorage, which was great. This is the part of the world where it's surprisingly untouched. So you literally have whales dropping by. We have manta rays that come and swim around the boat every morning when we were anchored there. And there are some of those in this little video clip coming up. But it's basically like arriving in paradise. It really was... well, I say that. We arrived and we were still a nervous wreck. So we had a bit of a breakdown for about a month. Coming off the adrenaline and the pain of all of that and working out, what are we going to do? We've got a fairly long list of repairs now. And
we're in the most remote part of the world. So we just had to sort of prioritize the list and say, right, well, what do we absolutely need and what can we put off till later? So we haven't repaired the spinnaker. We haven't repaired the bowsprit yet. The engine is very much
an ongoing
not
issue.
repaired. We've learned to anchor with only one engine now, which on a catamaran is a little bit challenging.
Yeah, catamarans have this thing, particularly when they're 47 feet long and about 7 meters wide. So if you start one engine, the boat just decides to go that way. And so in a tight space, we actually sailed into that tight port anchorage that you saw. It can be quite a challenge to sail onto an anchor point. And then we use our dinghy to back down and make sure our anchor is secure. So we've been learning a lot of new skills.
But basically all of the stories that we had heard about French Polynesia and the South Pacific from the people that we met in Trinidad and along the way, we are realizing how true they are. We are just amazed that we get to call this place home for a while. We actually love it so much, we just got temporary residency, so we're going to be staying there for a couple of years before we move on. And yeah, it is, I was going to say everything we dreamed of before we set off, but it is so much more than that. The adventures have just been incredible. The places we've seen are amazing. The people we've met are so generous. And we're just going to carry on until we want to do something else, I guess.
Yeah, we get asked that question all the time. In fact, this evening someone asked me, I forget who, but they were saying, how long are you going to do this for? And we kind of went, well, until a better adventure comes along. And we keep seeing better adventures and we're on them already. So it's kind of become a way of living for the time being.
Yeah,
and
this
really
is our life now. We've come back to the UK for just a month to see friends and family and share a bit of our story, but we're just going right back to Tahiti. That is home. As we said, we sold everything before we left. So yeah, that's everything for us.
So well done, you made it to the end. That's a whistle stop of everything. If you've seen any of the episodes we do episodes on YouTube every single week on Sundays. They're a nice little relaxing thing. You may have seen some of those stories already, but maybe there were some nuggets in there for you. We have a bit of that shameless plug for that vote if you still like us. Maybe you still like us. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us this evening in this incredible place. It's absolutely amazing, beautiful building.
If there's any questions, we're happy to answer them. I don't know what our timing is. I don't know when everybody needs to get home. We talk quite a lot, so I do apologize.
I don't know what our knowledge is either, so don't test us. But yeah, if there's any questions at all, or if you just want to catch us afterwards as well.
Thanks for joining us. If you haven't seen our episodes from our Pacific crossing, you can watch them all in this playlist, or join us next week when we'll be back to normal in Tahiti.